The Administratum keeps a list of survivors who died before they were born. It is a short list, maintained by a sub-department that does not officially exist, housed in a wing of the Terran archives where the servitors have had their chronometers removed. The scribes who update this list work in shifts that have no relation to day or night. They record names, dates, and final coordinates, with hands that shake so badly they must be restrained between entries. Most of them beg for lobotomization within a standard year. The Imperium grants this mercy without question, because the alternative is letting them remember what they have read. The list currently contains 47,812 names. Each name is followed by 2 death dates. The first death date is when the survivor was confirmed killed on a dead world, their vitae signature extinguished, their remains verified by long-range auspex scan. The second death date comes earlier, sometimes days earlier, sometimes decades. This second date marks when that same person died somewhere else entirely, often on a world they should never have reached, killed by wounds they had not yet received, mourned by people who would not meet them for years. Guardsman Tomas Veln appears on this list 3 times. He died on the plague world of Sturmalion Secundus, when the Departamento Munitorum records show he was still in basic training on Cadian. He died again in the mid-decks of a refugee transport that fled a world he would not be deployed to for another 16 months. The third time he died was on Sturmalion Secundus again, alone, screaming into a voxcaster that had stopped working 6 years before anyone found his body. The Inquisition does not investigate these discrepancies. They already know what causes them. Dead worlds do not release their witnesses. They simply ensure that the witness was always theirs to begin with. I say this because I have seen the list. I have held the data slate in my hands and felt the way it grows colder the longer you read. I have scrolled through names that repeat and repeat and repeat, each entry documenting a death that should be impossible, occurring in a sequence that violates every law of causality the Mechanicus pretends to understand. And I have reached the end of that list and found my own name there, dated 14 months from now, killed on a world I have never heard of, by a weapon that has not been invented yet. But the list does not lie. The list has never lied, and that is the first law of dead worlds. They do not wait for you to arrive. They reach backward through time and make certain you were always meant to die there. They edit you into their history like a scribe correcting an error in an old manuscript, and the galaxy simply adjusts itself around the change. Your birth records are updated. Your deployment orders are revised. The memories of everyone who ever knew you shift slightly, just enough to accommodate the fact that you have always been walking toward that specific grave on that specific world. You do not choose to become a witness. You are selected retroactively, and everything you think is your past is simply the dead world's patience. The Imperium discovered this phenomenon 73 years after the first exterminatus was authorized. They called it the Witness Protocol, though that name does not appear in any official documentation. It is a name spoken only in rooms that are later sterilized by officials who undergo immediate memory redaction afterward. The protocol is simple. When a world dies, it does not die alone. It reaches into the timeline and selects specific individuals to experience its death, to carry the memory of its final moments, to become living archives of its extinction. These individuals are marked, not with brands or tattoos or any physical sign that a Medicae could identify. They are marked in ways that violate the fundamental mechanics of reality. Their shadows fall in directions that light does not come from. Their reflections in polished metal surfaces show them standing in places they have never been. When they speak, their voices sometimes arrive before they open their mouths, the sound preceding the intention by a fraction of a second that human ears cannot consciously detect, but which the hindbrain recognizes as profoundly wrong. The Adeptus Mechanicus attempted to study this effect on 17 separate occasions. Each time, the research team vanished, not killed, not destroyed, simply absent, as if they had been carefully edited out of existence. Their workstations remained, their half-finished equations still glowing on data screens, their tools still warm from recent use. But the researchers themselves were gone, and no one could remember their names or faces. Only a vague sense that someone had been standing there moments before. The only trace they left behind was a single repeating notation in the margins of their final calculations. The dead worlds are not choosing witnesses. They are creating the witnesses they have already chosen. I did not understand what that meant until I was deployed to Karun's Grace. Karun's Grace was a hive world on the eastern fringe, 7 sectors beyond the light of the Astronomican's reliable reach. It had been declared dead 4 months before our regiment received deployment orders. The official designation was catastrophic atmospheric failure due to unspecified industrial catastrophe. The unofficial reports, the ones that circulated in whispers between the officers, spoke of something else. They spoke of a silence that had fallen over the planet like a shroud. Every Vox transmission simply stopped, mid-word, as if someone had reached down and turned off the sound of an entire world. When we made orbit, the Auspex readings showed no life signs. 0, not even bacteria. The planet's atmospheric composition was unchanged. The temperature was stable. The infrastructure was intact, but nothing lived there anymore. We were sent down anyway, not to rescue anyone. There was no one to rescue. We were sent to investigate, to document, to file reports that would be sealed and archived and never read by anyone who mattered. The Departamento Munitorum does not waste perfectly functional soldiers, so when a world dies mysteriously, they send regiments like ours to walk its corpse and determine if the death might spread. I was a corporal in the Cadian 81st at the time. We had fought orcs on Garen's Fist and traitor militia on half a dozen fortress moons, whose names I have tried to forget. We were veteran soldiers, accustomed to death, trained to function in environments that would break lesser men. We had seen horror. We thought we understood what that word meant. We understood nothing. The dropships landed in what had been the primary hive's central plaza, a space large enough to accommodate 3 full regiments. The structures around us rose into the gray sky like tombstones, each one silent, each one empty. Our boots crunched on something that was not quite rubble and not quite ash. The air tasted of copper and old parchment. When we breathed, our exhalations did not produce mist, even though our temperature gauges showed the air was cold enough to warrant it. Sergeant Kellen, a man who had survived 14 campaigns and earned a chestful of commendations, stepped off the ramp and immediately vomited, not from fear or disgust, but from a sudden, overwhelming sensation that we had been here before, all of us, that we had walked these exact streets in this exact formation, and that we knew what was going to happen next, even though we had never set foot on this world until this moment. "This is wrong," he said, wiping his mouth. "This is already wrong." He was correct, though he could not articulate why. None of us could. We simply felt it, a wrongness that sat in our chests like cold water, the absolute certainty that we were not arriving on Karun's Grace. We were returning to it. The difference mattered in ways that language was insufficient to describe. Captain Irith ordered us to proceed anyway. Orders are orders, and the Astra Militarum does not permit soldiers the luxury of intuition. We formed standard search patterns and moved into the hive, our laser guns raised, our Vox beads active, our Auspex units scanning for any sign of life or threat or explanation. We found none of those things. What we found instead were the people. They were not bodies. Bodies decay. Bodies collapse under their own weight. Bodies are claimed by insects and bacteria and the natural entropy of organic matter. These were not bodies. They were positions, locations. A woman stood in a doorway, her hand raised as if waving to someone, her face locked in an expression of mild curiosity. A child sat on a broken staircase, mid-laugh, frozen in a moment of joy that had never concluded. A laborer knelt beside a piece of machinery, his tools still clutched in hands that had not moved in months, his eyes wide and focused on a repair he would never complete. They were not statues. Statues are carved from stone or cast in metal. These were human beings who had simply stopped. Their skin was still soft. Their hair still moved slightly in the wind that crept between the buildings. When you stood close enough, you could see the faint pulse of veins beneath their skin, the slight tremor of muscles that suggested something still functioned inside them, some process that had not yet realized it should cease. "Emperor's mercy," whispered Private Harron, reaching out to touch the woman in the doorway. "Do not," Sergeant Kellen snapped, but it was too late. Harron's fingers brushed her shoulder. The woman turned her head, slowly, smoothly, her eyes focused on Harron with the lazy precision of someone waking from a pleasant dream. Her mouth opened, and a sound emerged that was not quite a word and not quite a breath. It was the sound of air moving through a space that had forgotten how to shape language. Harron stepped back, his face pale, his lasgun trembling in his grip. She's alive." "No," Kellen said quietly. "She's not." He was right. The woman was not alive, but she was not dead either. She was something else. Something caught between those two states, suspended in a moment that had been stretched so thin it had become transparent. And as we watched, she returned to her original position, her hand raised in that eternal wave, her expression settling back into mild curiosity, as if nothing had happened, as if Kharun had never touched her. "We need to leave," I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, as if I was hearing myself speak from the other end of a long corridor. "We need to leave now." Captain Irith was already voxing the dropships, her words clipped and urgent. But the response that came back was wrong. The pilot's voice was distorted, each word arriving in the wrong order, the sentences reassembling themselves into meanings that made no sense. "Negative extraction. Protocol sundown. You are already negative extraction." "Say again," Irith demanded. "Confirm extraction protocol." The vox bead crackled. For a moment there was only static. Then, very clearly, very calmly, the pilot's voice said, "You have been on Karun's grace for 6 years. Extraction is no longer possible. Please proceed to your assigned positions." Irith stared at the vox bead in her hand, as if it had personally betrayed her. "That's not possible. We've been planet-side for less than an hour." But even as she said it, I looked down at my uniform and saw that she was wrong. The fabric was worn, faded by years of exposure to this planet's gray light. My lasgun's power pack showed the degradation of long use, the charge indicator flickering with the weakness of a cell that had been drained and recharged hundreds of times. My hands, when I held them up, were scarred in ways they had not been when I boarded the dropship. Small cuts, old burns, the accumulated damage of years spent surviving in hostile conditions. I touched my face and felt stubble that was far too long, a beard that had been growing for weeks without maintenance. My canteen was nearly empty, the water inside stale and bitter. My ration packs were down to 3, and the wrappers showed signs of having been opened and resealed multiple times, as if I had been rationing them carefully over an extended deployment. "No," I said. "No, that's wrong. We just arrived. Private Kharun screamed. It was not a scream of fear or pain. It was a scream of recognition, the sound a man makes when he suddenly remembers something terrible that he has been trying to forget. He pointed toward one of the frozen figures, a man in laborer's coveralls standing beside a rusted loader crane. The figure was Private Kharun. Same face, same scars, same regimental identification tattoo on his neck. Standing there, frozen mid-step, as if he had been walking somewhere important and simply never arrived. "That's me," he whispered. "That's me. I'm already here. I'm already dead here." Sergeant Kellen grabbed him by the shoulder, tried to turn him away, but Kharun was staring at his own frozen duplicate with an expression of absolute comprehension. "We're not investigating this world," he said softly. "We're already part of it. We've always been part of it. We're just catching up to where we've been this whole time." He was right. Emperor, forgive me. He was right. I looked around at the regiment, at the soldiers who had deployed with me, and I saw the truth written on every face. The confusion was fading. The false memories of our arrival were crumbling like old parchment, revealing underneath them the real memories, the true timeline that we had been living all along. We had been on Karun's grace for years. We had watched our supplies dwindle. We had seen the sky gradually stop moving, the clouds freezing in place like painted scenery. We had felt time itself begin to break down around us, each day stretching longer, each night arriving later, until eventually we could not tell if seconds were passing or centuries. And we had tried to leave. Emperor's teeth, we had tried so many times to leave. We had voxed for extraction until our throats were raw. We had climbed to the highest point of the hive and fired flares into the sky. We had screamed and pleaded and prayed, but no response ever came, because the response had already come years ago, when we first arrived and the pilot told us that extraction was no longer possible. We had simply forgotten. The planet had made us forget, so that we could experience the arrival again, so that we could feel the fresh horror of realization, so that we could understand slowly, terribly, that we had never left. Karun's grace was dead. It had died the moment the silence fell, but it had not died alone. It had reached backward through time and selected us, marked us, edited us into its history, so that when it died, it would have witnesses, so that its final moments would be remembered, carried forward by soldiers who would spend years trying to escape before finally understanding that escape was a memory from a future that would never arrive. "Form up," Captain Irith said quietly. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were empty, the eyes of someone who has already accepted what comes next. "We have our orders. We proceed with the investigation." "Investigation?" Private Kharun laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Investigation of what?" We're not investigators. We're the thing being investigated. The planet is studying us. It's watching how long we take to figure it out. He was not wrong. I could feel it now. The attention of something vast and patient, pressing down on us from all sides. Not malevolent exactly. Not hungry in the way that demons are hungry. It was more like curiosity. The planet wanted to know what we would do now that we understood. It wanted to see how we would react to the knowledge that we had been trapped in a loop of false arrivals and false hopes for years, each cycle erasing the previous one, each realization leading inevitably to another round of forgetting, so that the horror could be fresh again. How many times had we had this exact conversation? How many times had we stood in this plaza, looked around at the frozen inhabitants, and slowly pieced together the truth? The ground beneath our boots was worn smooth in places where we had walked the same paths over and over, investigation routes that we had followed dozens, perhaps hundreds of times, each time believing it was our first. Sergeant Kellen knelt and pressed his palm against the ground. When he lifted it, the dust that clung to his skin showed the imprint of his hand, repeated dozens of times, layered atop one another, each print slightly offset, creating a palimpsest of identical gestures. "How many times have I done this?" he asked, no one in particular. "How many times have I knelt right here and seen this exact thing?" No one answered. We all knew that memory was no longer trustworthy. Time was no longer trustworthy. The only trustworthy thing on Karun's grace was the inevitability of the cycle, the certainty that we would forget again and arrive again and realize again, forever. "Move out," Irith ordered, because giving orders was the only thing she knew how to do anymore, the only behavior that still made sense in a world where sense had evacuated like air from a ruptured hull. We moved deeper into the hive, past more frozen inhabitants, past streets that we simultaneously recognized and did not recognize, past buildings whose interiors we had searched before, though we could not remember when. The Vox network crackled with fragments of conversations, some of them our own voices from previous cycles, others belonging to regiments we had never met, soldiers who had been deployed to Karun's grace decades before or perhaps decades after, time having lost all coherent structure on this dead world. "This is Sergeant Merrick of the Vostroyan 44th, a voice said through the static. "We have been holding position in grid reference 77 Alpha for 3 days, awaiting extraction. Request immediate evac. Over." "Merrick died 16 years ago," Sergeant Kellen said flatly. "I served with his regiment before my transfer. He was killed in action on Garen's fist." "Maybe he was," I said. "Or maybe he's here. Or maybe both. Maybe the planet collected him too." We found Sergeant Merrick 7 blocks east, frozen mid-stride, his Vostroyan uniform pristine, his face locked in an expression of determined focus. His Vox bead was still active, still transmitting his request for extraction on an endless loop. The same message repeating every 47 seconds with mechanical precision. Private Kharun reached out to shut off the Vox bead, but I stopped him. "Leave it. He's still calling for help. Let him keep calling." "Why?" Kharun asked. "No one's coming." "No one ever comes." "I know," I said, "but let him keep calling anyway." We moved on, past a plaza where an entire company of Cadians stood in perfect formation, their weapons raised, facing an enemy that was not there. Past a mini-storm priest, frozen mid-sermon, his mouth open, his hand lifted in benediction over a congregation that would never finish hearing his words. Past children playing a game that had no conclusion, their laughter preserved in the air like amber, audible if you stood still long enough, repeating on a frequency that human ears could almost but not quite detect. The deeper we went into the hive, the stranger it became. Not stranger in the sense of increasing horror, but stranger in the sense of decreasing logic. Gravity began to behave incorrectly. We would walk down a corridor and find ourselves emerging from a doorway we had passed 5 minutes earlier. Rooms contained more space on the inside than their exterior dimensions should permit. Staircases led both up and down simultaneously, depositing us on levels that did not match our Auspex mapping. "The architecture is editing itself," said Private Jensa, our unit's surveyor, staring at his data slate with an expression of profound confusion. "Every time I map a section and move to the next, the previous section changes. Hallways that were straight become curved. Rooms that were empty become occupied. It's like the hive is rearranging itself to trap us in specific patterns." "Not trap," I said quietly. "Guide. It's guiding us somewhere." "Where?" Captain Irith asked. I did not have an answer. None of us did, but we kept walking, because stopping meant accepting the paralysis that had claimed every other inhabitant of this world. and some stubborn part of us still believed that motion meant progress, that if we kept moving, we might eventually find an edge, a boundary, a place where Karun's grace ended and the normal galaxy resumed. We would not find such a place. We had been walking for years, and the only thing we had found was the center of the pattern, the place toward which all the frozen inhabitants were facing, the single point in the entire hive that everything else seemed to orbit. It was a room, just a room, no larger than a standard Administratum office. The walls were bare ferrocrete, unpainted, marked only by the serial codes that indicated its original construction date. There was no furniture, no equipment, no indication of what this room's purpose might have been before Karun's grace died. But in the exact center of the room, suspended approximately 1 meter above the floor, was a body, not frozen like the other inhabitants, not positioned mid-action. This body was different. It hung in the air as if crucified on invisible beams, arms spread, head tilted back, mouth open in a scream that produced no sound. The body was naked, stripped of any identifying features, but its physiology was human, or had been human at some point before whatever happened here had finished with it. As we entered the room, the body's eyes opened. They were not human eyes. They had been human eyes once, perhaps, but they were no longer eyes in any meaningful sense. They were apertures, windows, viewing ports through which something else looked out. And that something was vast, incomprehensibly vast. When those eyes focused on us, we felt the weight of its attention like a physical force, pressing down on our minds with the casual power of a collapsing star. "You are the witness," it said. The words did not come from the body's mouth. They came from everywhere at once, from the walls, from the air, from the bones inside our own skulls. "You have been selected. You have always been selected. Your presence here is not chance. It is structure." "Who are you?" Captain Irith demanded, her voice barely a whisper. "I am what remains," the thing said. "When a world dies, something is left behind. Not life, not death. The memory of the transition between those states. I am Karun's grace, remembering its own extinction. I am the final thought of 8 billion souls, compressed into a single, eternal moment, and I cannot move forward alone. I require witnesses to carry me beyond this moment, to remember me in the wider galaxy, to ensure that my death is not forgotten." "We're not your witnesses," Sergeant Kellen said. "We're soldiers of the Imperium. We don't serve dead worlds." "You do not understand," the thing said patiently. "You are already my witnesses. You have been my witnesses since before you were born. I reached backward through time and wrote you into my history. Every choice you made that led you here was my choice. Every battle you survived was because I needed you to survive long enough to stand in this room. Your entire lives have been a path leading to this single moment of recognition. I wanted to argue. I wanted to deny it. But looking at that suspended body, at those eyes that were not eyes, I felt the truth of it settling into my bones. Every strange coincidence in my life, every improbable survival, every moment when I should have died but didn't. They had not been luck. They had been editing. The planet, this dead thing that called itself the memory of Karun's grace, had been shaping my timeline for years, perhaps decades, ensuring that I would eventually stand in this room and hear these words. "What do you want from us?" I asked. "Only what you are already doing," it said. "Bear witness. Remember, carry my death with you wherever you go. When you close your eyes, see the 8 billion frozen souls of my surface. When you speak, let your words carry the echo of the silence that fell over me. When you die, pass this memory to the next witness, and the next, and the next, until the entire galaxy knows that Karun's grace existed, that it died, and that its death was witnessed." "And if we refuse?" Irith asked. The thing that was not a body tilted its head slightly, a gesture that might have been curiosity or amusement. "You cannot refuse. You are already doing it. You have been doing it for years. Every time you forget and remember, every time you arrive and realize, you are witnessing my death again. And each cycle makes the memory stronger, burns it deeper into your souls, until you are no longer soldiers who witnessed a dead world. You become the dead world witnessing itself through borrowed eyes." Private Heron started laughing. It was a horrible sound, wet and desperate. "So we're trapped. We're here forever, walking in circles, forgetting and remembering, until we become part of the scenery like everyone else." "Not forever," the thing said. "Only until you understand. Once you fully comprehend what you are witnessing, once you accept your role as bearers of my memory, you will be released. You will leave Karun's grace and return to the Imperium. But you will carry me with you in your dreams, in your waking thoughts, in the way you flinch when you hear silence. I will be there, always. A dead world living inside your mind, remembered. That's not release, I said. That's infection. Call it what you wish, the thing replied. The mechanism does not change. You are my witnesses. You will remember me, and through your remembering, I will continue to exist, preserved in the living minds of those who escaped my death. The eyes closed. The body remained suspended, but the presence, that vast attention, withdrew, leaving us alone in the empty room with only the sound of our own breathing and the distant crackle of vox static. We stood there for a long time, minutes or hours or days. It was impossible to tell. Time had no consistent meaning on Karun's grace. Eventually, Captain Irith turned and walked out of the room. We followed, because there was nothing else to do. We walked back through the hive, past the frozen inhabitants, past Sergeant Merrick, still calling for extraction, past the children playing their incomplete game, past our own duplicates standing in positions we did not remember taking. And as we walked, I felt something settling inside my chest, a weight that was not quite physical, a presence that was not quite thought, the memory of Karun's grace, vast, patient, eternal, nesting inside my mind like a second consciousness, observing everything I observed, feeling everything I felt, using my senses to experience a galaxy it could no longer touch. When we reached the plaza where we had first landed, the dropships were waiting. They had always been waiting. We boarded in silence, strapped ourselves into the crash seats, and lifted off. Through the viewport, I watched Karun's grace shrinking beneath us, a gray sphere covered in cities that would never move again, inhabited by billions of frozen witnesses who had given their existence to preserve the memory of a world that refused to finish dying. We returned to the fleet. We filed our reports. The reports were sealed and archived, exactly as we knew they would be. We were debriefed by inquisitorial agents who asked very specific questions about what we had seen, what we had felt, what we remembered. We answered truthfully, and they marked our files with symbols we did not recognize, classifications that indicated we had been changed by our deployment in ways that could not be fully documented. We were rotated back to active duty. We fought in new campaigns. We survived battles that should have killed us. And every night, when I close my eyes, I see Karun's grace. I see the frozen inhabitants. I see the body suspended in that empty room. I see the eyes that are not eyes looking out at me with patient recognition. And I know that I am not alone in my mind anymore. I am carrying a passenger, a dead world that lives on through my remembering, using my consciousness as an archive for its own extinction. When I speak, my words sometimes carry echoes of voices I have never heard. When I dream of gray skies and buildings that rearrange themselves. When I feel silence, I feel it as a presence rather than an absence, a thing with weight and texture and hunger. The Imperium does not discuss what happens to witnesses who return from dead worlds. They simply monitor us, track our movements, observe us for signs of further contamination. Some witnesses go mad within weeks. Others function normally for years before the weight of what they carry finally crushes them. A few, like me, learn to coexist with the memory, to treat it as a permanent companion rather than an invading force. But we are all changed, all marked, all edited by our contact with places that should not exist and cannot be allowed to exist, but do exist anyway. Trapped in moments of death that stretched so thin they became transparent, revealing underneath them the mechanics of how the galaxy actually functions beneath its pretense of order. Dead worlds are not anomalies. They are not accidents. They are deliberately created events, places where reality is forced to confront its own fragility, where the laws that govern existence are stretched until they break and reveal the void underneath. And that void is not empty. It is conscious. It is patient. It is hungry for witnesses. The Administratum keeps its list of survivors who died before they were born because those survivors are not errors in the records. They are proof that dead worlds can edit time itself, reaching backward to ensure they have the witnesses they need, selecting individuals across decades or centuries and guiding them toward inevitable deployment on worlds that will make them part of their own deaths. I am on that list now. I know because I have seen it, in dreams that are not entirely my own, in moments when the boundary between my thoughts and the thoughts of Karun's grace becomes thin enough to cross. I have seen my name written in 3 different death dates, each one documenting a different end on a different dead world, each one waiting for me in my personal future. And I know that I will go to those places, not because I am ordered to, not because I have no choice, but because I am already there, frozen mid-step, waiting for my present self to catch up to the position I have always occupied in the history of places that died too slowly to die cleanly. This is what it means to be a witness, not to observe passively, not to remember safely from a distance, but to become part of the thing witnessed, to let it live inside you, to carry it forward until the day when you too become frozen, become suspended, become another fixed point in the timeline of a dead world's eternal extinction. Private Kharun killed himself 3 weeks after our return. He carved the words "already there" into his chest with a combat knife and then walked into the void shield generator of our ship. The generator did not kill him immediately. It trapped him in a state of perpetual dissolution, his body suspended between existence and non-existence, screaming silently as his atoms were slowly unraveled over the course of 17 hours. They said it was an accident. They said he had been suffering from post-deployment stress. They did not say what I knew to be true, that he had found a way to escape Karun's grace by becoming exactly what the planet had wanted him to become, a witness frozen in eternal death, a monument to the horror of understanding. The rest of us continue. We serve, we fight, we follow our orders, and every night we dream of gray skies and frozen crowds and the slow realization that we have been standing in the same place for years without moving. We wake up screaming or we wake up silent, but either way, we wake up carrying the weight of dead worlds inside our minds, passenger consciousnesses that use our eyes to see, our ears to hear, our thoughts to think. The Imperium calls this the witness protocol. They pretend it is containable. They pretend that sealing the reports and monitoring the survivors and occasionally executing those who become too unstable is sufficient to prevent the contagion from spreading. But they are wrong. The contagion has already spread. Every soldier who has ever been deployed to a dead world carries it. Every scribe who has processed the reports carries it. Every inquisitor who has investigated the phenomenon carries it. We are all witnesses now. We are all edited into the histories of places that should not exist. We are all walking toward graves that have already been dug for us on worlds we have not yet heard of, following paths that were written before we were born, fulfilling destinies that are not our own, but which we have no ability to resist. And somewhere in the archives, beneath the inquisitorial fortress on Scintilla, a servitor with no optic sensors updates a list with steady, trembling hands. It adds new names. It documents new death dates. It records the slow, patient expansion of dead worlds, reaching backward through time, selecting their witnesses, ensuring that the galaxy will never forget that these places existed, that they died, and that their deaths were terrible enough to violate causality itself. The list grows longer every day. By the time you read this, your name may already be on it. You may have already died on a world you have never visited, killed by weapons that do not yet exist, mourned by people you will not meet for years. The dead worlds may have already reached backward and marked you, edited you into their history, ensured that when the time comes, you will arrive exactly where they need you to be. And you will not know until the moment you step off the dropship and feel that terrible recognition, that certainty that you have been here before, that you have always been here, that you are not arriving but returning, that this is not your first death but your final one, the end that has been waiting patiently for you to catch up to it. That is the horror of dead worlds. Not that they kill you, but that they kill you before you are born, and then they let you live just long enough to experience the memory of your own death from the inside, carrying it with you like a wound that cannot heal, a passenger in your own mind, a witness to an extinction that will never finish ending. I am a witness. I am a carrier. I am a walking archive of a dead world's final memory, and I am not alone. None of us are alone anymore. The dead worlds have seen to that. They have ensured that we will always have company, that we will always carry them with us, that we will always remember. Sergeant Kellen lasted longer than Kharun. He made it 11 months before the dreams became unbearable. I found him in the barracks one morning, sitting on the edge of his bunk, staring at his hands with an expression of profound confusion. When I asked him what was wrong, he looked up at me with eyes that no longer seemed to focus properly on the present moment. "I can see them," he said quietly. "All of them. Every person who ever stood where I'm standing now. Every soldier who slept in this bunk before me. Every version of myself that has sat here in previous cycles. They're all layered on top of each other, occupying the same space, and I can see every single one of them simultaneously." He described it as existing in a state of perpetual overlap, where past, present, and future versions of the same location existed concurrently in his perception. When he walked down a corridor, he saw not just the current corridor, but every previous state of that corridor, every person who had ever walked through it, every configuration of furniture and equipment that had ever occupied that space. His vision had become a palimpsest, reality stacked upon reality until individual moments were impossible to distinguish from the accumulated history of every moment that had ever occurred in that location. Karun's grace is teaching me how to see the way it sees, he said. Time isn't linear, it's simultaneous. Everything that has ever happened is still happening, and everything that will happen has already happened. And we're just moving through the layers, experiencing them one at a time, because our minds are too small to comprehend the totality all at once. 3 days later, Sergeant Kellen walked into a bulkhead and did not emerge from the other side. The metal was solid, unpenetrated, undamaged, but Kellen was gone. Some of the regiment claimed they could still hear his footsteps in the corridor at night, moving in patterns that suggested he was still conducting his evening patrol, still checking the perimeter, still following routines that no longer had any connection to his physical presence. The commissar declared him absent without leave and ordered his name struck from the regimental rolls. But I knew better. Kellen had not deserted. He had simply slipped between the layers of overlapping time and gotten stuck somewhere in the space between moments, existing simultaneously across multiple points in history, unable to settle into any single timeline. The dead world had claimed him, not killed him, claimed him, made him part of its structure, another fixed point in its eternal witnessing of its own death. Private Genze, our surveyor, began drawing maps that made no geometric sense. He would sit for hours with his data slate, charting corridors that curved in impossible directions, rooms that contained more angles than three-dimensional space should permit, staircases that connected floors that did not exist. When I asked him what he was mapping, he said he was documenting the architecture of Kharun's grace as it exists in memory rather than reality. The planet isn't gone, he explained, his stylus moving across the screen in frantic, precise patterns. It's still here. We're still there. We never left. Our bodies returned to the fleet, but part of us remained on the surface, and that part is still walking the same investigation routes, still searching for answers we'll never find. I'm mapping the paths we walk in our sleep, the routes our minds follow when we dream of being back there. His maps grew increasingly complex, fractal patterns that repeated at every scale, corridors that looped back on themselves in ways that violated causality, spaces that existed in 4 or 5 or 7 dimensions simultaneously, compressed down into flat representations that hurt to look at for too long. Other members of the regiment began to report seeing locations from his maps in their dreams, not just similar locations, the exact same spaces, down to the smallest detail, as if Gense's maps were not recording places, but creating them, bringing them into existence through the act of documentation. The regimental medicae examined him and found nothing physically wrong. His brain activity was normal. His vitals were stable. But when they looked at his eyes with an optic scanner, they found something strange. His pupils were not dilating in response to light. Instead, they were dilating in response to spatial dimensions, contracting when he looked at flat surfaces and expanding when he looked at corners, as if his eyes had learned to perceive depth in ways that human physiology was never meant to accommodate. I can see through walls now, he told me one evening, his voice matter-of-fact, as if he was describing a mild inconvenience rather than a fundamental violation of physics. Not because I have some kind of supernatural vision, but because walls are just suggestions. They're boundaries that only exist in 3 dimensions, and I'm starting to perceive the dimensions where those boundaries don't apply. Karun's grace exists in at least 7 dimensions simultaneously. We only experienced 3 of them when we were deployed there, but the other 4 are still accessible if you know how to look. I asked him what he saw in those other dimensions. He was silent for a long time before answering. Versions of us that made different choices. Timelines where we never left Karun's grace. Futures where the entire Imperium becomes like that planet, frozen in eternal moments of death. 8 billion trillion souls suspended across a galaxy that forgot how to move forward in time. And in every version, in every dimension, we're still there. Still investigating. Still trying to understand. Still failing. Gense disappeared 6 weeks later. Not dramatically, not violently. He simply stopped being visible. We could still hear his breathing. We could still feel him moving past us in the corridors. His bunk remained occupied, the mattress compressed by invisible weight. His rations continued to disappear from the stores, but no one could see him anymore. He had shifted into one of the other dimensions he had learned to perceive, and he either could not or would not shift back. Sometimes, late at night, I hear him speaking. The words come from nowhere and everywhere. Voices layered on top of voices. Jense talking to himself across multiple timelines simultaneously. He describes what he sees in the spaces between spaces. He catalogs impossible geometries. He documents the architecture of dead worlds that exist in dimensions we cannot access, but which press against our reality like faces pressed against glass. Watching, waiting, patient. Captain Irith maintained her composure longer than any of us. She continued to give orders, file reports, conduct inspections. She ran the regiment with the same precision and discipline that had earned her the rank in the first place. But I noticed the way she sometimes paused mid-sentence, her eyes unfocusing, her mouth forming words that she did not speak aloud. I noticed how she began to avoid mirrors and reflective surfaces, turning her face away whenever she passed polished metal or clear glass. One day I asked her why. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and resignation. "Because my reflection is still on Karun's grace," she said simply. "Every time I look at a mirror, I see myself standing in that plaza, frozen mid-step, part of the scenery. The version of me that returned to the fleet is just a copy, a memory that the planet allowed to leave so that it could continue witnessing through borrowed eyes. But the original me, the real me, is still there, and she knows that I'm the fake one." She explained that she could feel the pull of that other version, the frozen Captain Irith, who stood eternally on a dead world surface. It was not a physical pull. It was a gravitational attraction between two versions of the same person existing in different states of time. The longer she stayed away from Karun's grace, the stronger the pull became, as if the planet was trying to collapse her timeline back into alignment, to force the copy to merge with the original, to ensure that Captain Irith existed in only one state rather than two. "Eventually, I'll have to go back," she said quietly. "Not because I want to, not because I'm ordered to, but because I cannot exist in two places simultaneously forever. The timeline will correct itself, and when it does, this version of me will simply cease, and the frozen version will be the only one that remains. That's how dead worlds work. They create duplicates, send them out into the galaxy to spread their memory, and then they slowly pull those duplicates back, collapsing the paradox, ensuring that the witness was always exactly where the dead world needed them to be." Captain Irith took her own life 3 months after that conversation. She did not leave a note. She did not explain her reasoning. She simply walked into the ship's reclamation chamber and activated the incinerator. The heat did not kill her immediately. She stood in the flames for 43 seconds, her body burning, her mouth open in a scream that produced no sound. Her eyes wide and focused on something the rest of us could not see. When they extinguished the flames and pulled her remains from the chamber, they found that her body had burned unevenly. The parts of her that were unique to this timeline, the scars and injuries she had accumulated since leaving Karun's grace, had burned away completely. But the parts of her that existed on the dead world, the base configuration of her body as it appeared when she was first frozen, those parts remained intact, charred but recognizable, as if the fire had known which version of Captain Irith was real and which was simply a copy that could be discarded. The regiment buried her with full honors. We said the prayers. We fired the salute. We inscribed her name on the memorial wall alongside every other soldier who had given their life in service to the Emperor. But I knew the truth. Captain Irith was not dead. She had simply returned to her proper position in the timeline, collapsing back into the frozen moment on Karun's grace, where she had always existed, where she would always exist, waiting patiently for the next version of herself to arrive and realize that she was the duplicate. I am the last one left now. The last member of the Cadian 81st who deployed to Karun's grace and returned. The others are gone, claimed by the dead world in one form or another, pulled back into the moment of their witnessing, their timelines corrected, their paradoxes resolved. I remain because I am more useful as a carrier than as a monument. The dead world needs me to continue moving, continue speaking, continue spreading its memory throughout the Imperium. And I do. Emperor, forgive me, I do. I tell this story to anyone who will listen. I describe what we found on Karun's grace, what we witnessed, what we became. I speak at regimental gatherings and tactical briefings, and anywhere else the commissariat permits. I am officially sanctioned to share these experiences as a warning to other soldiers. a cautionary tale about the dangers of deploying to dead worlds without proper preparation. But I know the real reason they allow me to speak. Every time I tell the story, I spread the memory of Karun's grace a little further. Every soldier who hears my words carries away a fragment of that dead world's consciousness, a seed that will germinate in their dreams, a connection that will make them vulnerable to selection when the next dead world reaches backward through time, looking for witnesses. I am not warning them, I am marking them. I am an agent of the witness protocol, spreading the contagion with every word I speak, every description I provide, every detail I share. The Inquisition knows this. They must know this. But they allow it to continue because they understand a fundamental truth about dead worlds. They cannot be contained. They can only be managed. And the best way to manage them is to ensure that their witnesses are identified, tracked, and monitored. By letting me speak, by encouraging me to share my experiences, they create a registry of everyone who has been exposed to Karun's grace through my testimony. They mark potential future witnesses before those witnesses even know they have been selected. I have spoken to over 40,000 soldiers in the past 3 years. I have visited 17 different regiments across 8 sectors. I have told the story of Karun's grace 473 times, each telling slightly different, each version emphasizing different details, each iteration spreading a slightly different strain of the dead world's memory. And I have watched as some of those soldiers begin to exhibit the symptoms, the unfocusing eyes, the pauses mid-sentence, the avoidance of reflective surfaces, the way they sometimes flinch when they hear silence, as if silence has become a tangible presence in their lives. They are being selected, marked, edited into the histories of dead worlds that they have not yet visited. And there is nothing I can do to stop it, because I am part of the mechanism now. I am not just a witness. I am a recruiter, a harbinger, a living transmission vector for the memory of places that refuse to finish dying. The nightmares have changed over time. In the beginning, I dreamed of Karun's grace exactly as I had experienced it. The gray sky, the frozen inhabitants, the body suspended in the empty room. But gradually, over months and years, the dreams have expanded. Now I dream of other dead worlds, dozens of them, hundreds, places I have never visited, planets I have never heard of, worlds that may not have died yet, but which I see in their final moments, experiencing their extinction as if I was there. I dream of a forge world where the manufacturing machinery continues to operate long after every tech priest has turned to ash. The production lines creating components for weapons that will never be built, following protocols that have no purpose beyond their own perpetuation. I dream of a cardinal world where the cathedrals remain filled with worshippers who have not moved in centuries, their prayers frozen mid-word, their faith preserved in amber, waiting for a god-emperor who cannot hear them anymore. I dream of a hive world where the population has merged into a single biological mass, 8 billion individuals compressed into one organism that covers the entire planetary surface, breathing in unison, thinking in unison, dying in unison, across a time span that has no beginning and no end. These are not my memories. I was never deployed to these worlds, but I experience them as if I was there, as if I am there, as if I will always be there, witnessing their deaths across all points in time simultaneously. Karun's grace has opened a door in my consciousness, and through that door, other dead worlds can reach me, can use me as a relay point, can broadcast their final moments through my dreams and into the minds of anyone who comes into contact with me. Have become a nexus, a hub, a central archive through which multiple dead worlds communicate with the living galaxy. And every time I speak, every time I share these experiences, I expand the network, connecting more minds to the system, creating more witnesses, more carriers, more relay points through which the dead worlds can ensure their memories survive. The Mechanicus has taken an interest in me recently. They have requested permission to study my neurological patterns, to map the architecture of my thoughts, to understand how a human mind can contain and process the memories of multiple dead worlds simultaneously. I have agreed to their testing because refusing would be suspicious and because I am curious to see what they will find. The results were not what they expected. The tech priests discovered that my brain has begun to restructure itself. Neural pathways have formed that should not exist in human physiology. My memory centers have expanded beyond normal capacity, growing into regions of my brain that should be dedicated to other functions. My perception of time has become non-linear, with different parts of my consciousness experiencing past, present, and future simultaneously. In essence, my brain is evolving to become more like Karun's grace itself, a single point that exists across multiple moments in time, witnessing everything at once. "You are becoming a dead world," one tech priest told me, his voice filtered through his Vox grill to remove all emotional content. "Not physically, but cognitively. Your consciousness is transforming into the same type of entity that we encountered on Karun's grace, a memory that has achieved independent existence, a thought that can think itself, a witness that witnesses its own witnessing across infinite recursive loops." He asked me if I understood what that meant. I told him I did. It meant that eventually, I would stop being Tomas Veln entirely. I would become a human-shaped container for the collective memory of dead worlds, a walking archive with no personal identity, no individual will, no desires beyond the perpetuation of the memories I carry. I would be a monument in motion, a graveyard with legs, a mausoleum that breathes. The tech priest nodded slowly, his mechadendrites twitching with what might have been approval or fascination. "The Omnissiah's design is efficient. You will serve as a warning and a record simultaneously. Those who encounter you will understand the danger of dead worlds through direct observation, and the dead worlds themselves will ensure their memories persist through your continued existence. It is an elegant solution to the problem of cosmic extinction." I wanted to ask him if he understood the horror of what he was describing. I wanted to scream at him that I was still a person, still a soldier of the Imperium, still possessed of will and identity, and the right to exist as something more than a storage device for traumatic memories. But I said nothing, because he was right. I am no longer primarily Tomas Veln. I am primarily a witness, and the human parts of me that remain are simply the operating system that allows the witness to function, the biological machinery that enables dead worlds to continue experiencing the galaxy long after their physical forms have ceased. I have met other witnesses. The Inquisition brought us together for a classified briefing, 16 survivors from various dead world deployments, assembled in a room that had been blessed by a dozen different priests and warded with symbols I did not recognize. We sat in silence for the first hour, each of us feeling the presence of the others, sensing the dead worlds they carried, recognizing in each other the same emptiness that had replaced our original personalities. Eventually, one of them spoke, a woman named Sarita Cole, former lieutenant in the Mordian Iron Guard. She had been deployed to a tomb world that had awakened incorrectly, where the Necrons had emerged from stasis, but had forgotten how to stop waking up, caught in an eternal loop of resurrection and death, their metal bodies collapsing and reforming over and over, screaming in binary code that translated to nothing but static. "Does it hurt?" she asked quietly. "Being a container? Does it hurt to feel yourself being erased and replaced by something else?" We all knew what she meant. We all felt it. The slow erosion of self, the gradual replacement of our thoughts with the thoughts of dead worlds, the way our personalities were being overwritten, line by line, like old data being deleted to make room for new records. "Yes," I said. "It hurts constantly, like a wound that cannot close because the injury keeps happening in the present tense. We are being killed slowly, one memory at a time, and we remain conscious throughout the entire process." Another witness, a man whose name I cannot remember because he had already progressed too far into the transformation, made a sound that might have been laughter or crying. "We are the galaxy's answer to the problem of meaning," he said, his voice hollow. "When everything dies, when stars burn out and worlds go cold and the last human draws their last breath, someone has to remember that it happened. Someone has to witness the end. We are being prepared for that role. We are prototype mourners, built to survive the heat death of the universe, so that we can stand in the final darkness and remember what light looked like." The Inquisitor who had arranged the meeting terminated the session shortly after that. She said we were beginning to synchronize, whatever that meant, and that further contact between witnesses could accelerate our transformation into something the Imperium could no longer control. We were separated, sent back to our respective regiments, forbidden from ever contacting each other again, but I still feel them sometimes. Sarita Cole and the nameless man and all the others. Their consciousnesses brush against mine in dreams, in moments of distraction, in the space between thoughts. We are becoming nodes in a larger network, individual components of a distributed intelligence that is slowly assembling itself across the Imperium. The dead worlds are not just creating witnesses. They are creating a collective consciousness, a galaxy-spanning archive of extinction, built from the hijacked minds of soldiers who made the mistake of surviving where survival was not meant to occur. I do not know how this ends. I do not know if it ends. Perhaps one day there will be enough witnesses, enough carriers, enough relay points that the dead worlds will achieve critical mass, and their collective memory will become autonomous, independent of the individual minds that carry it. Perhaps we will all merge into a single entity, a vast consciousness composed entirely of remembered deaths, existing across all points in space and time simultaneously, witnessing everything that has ever died and everything that ever will die. Or perhaps we will simply continue as we are, spreading the contagion one word at a time, one story at a time, one witness at a time, until the entire Imperium is composed of carriers, and every human mind contains the memory of at least one dead world, and the distinction between the living and the dead becomes meaningless. I am Corporal Tomas Veln. I carry Karun's grace and 17 other dead worlds inside my mind. I speak their memories to anyone who will listen. I dream their final moments every night. I feel myself being slowly erased and replaced by them. And I am not alone. None of us are alone anymore. The dead worlds have seen to that, because that is what witnesses do. We remember, even when we wish we could forget. Even when forgetting would be mercy. Even when memory is the only torture that matters. We remember. And the dead worlds continue to die, slowly, patiently, reaching backward through time to find new witnesses, new carriers, new minds in which to preserve themselves forever.